Next is recovery. Recovery is returning your body back to pre-exercise state. Recovery is after exercise. This is when the body solely rests, and this could be engaging in low intensity exercise and a cool down, which helps in aiding recovery. During this, the body rests and goes back to its original state. Different exercises need different lengths of types of recovery. High intensity, low duration needs more of a slow recovery called lactacid. This involves the breakdown of lactic acid, maintenance of ventilation, circulation, and body temperature. And low intensity, high duration needs more of a fast recovery called alactic. This involves ATP-PC recovery and myoglobin and hemoglobin resynthesize. Next up is oxygen deficit and EPOC. Oxygen deficit is the amount of oxygen that isn't used at the beginning of exercise due to the fact that you are working aerobically and anaerobic. And the aerobic system takes about 4 minutes for it to work efficiently. So ATP, PC, lactic acid energy systems work before, and neither of them use oxygen. EPOC, which stands for excess post-exercise oxygen consumption, is when you breathe deeply and fast following exercise to get your body back to pre-exercise state. You're paying back the deficit. Oxygen deficit differs in size depending on submaximal or maximal exercise is happening. For maximal exercise, this would be short duration yet high intensity. Exercise oxygen deficit would be very large, as they aren't using oxygen. It is an anaerobic exercise using ATP, PC, lactic acid energy system, and the excess post-exercise oxygen consumption would also be large, as there's a lot of oxygen that needs to be recovered. Recovery would also last for a longer CEBA time and be a slower recovery. A sporting example of this would be 400-meter runner, as that is an anaerobic activity. It doesn't use much oxygen at all, so it would fall under a predominantly slow recovery called lactacid, as there is a big breakdown of lactic acid, and for oxygen to go to the muscles, as there is a high oxygen deficit. However, with submaximal exercise, it is long duration and low intensity. The oxygen deficit would be smaller because they use their anaerobic system for 3 to 4 minutes, and they then use their aerobic energy system. This is because they are then working at a steady exercise, which doesn't happen during anaerobic maximal exercise. At the recovery section, the excess post-exercise oxygen consumption wouldn't be large and would be quicker to get back to pre-exercise state. A sporting example of this would be a marathon runner. This is a steady state exercise that uses a lot of oxygen. This is mainly an aerobic activity. This type of activity would have predominantly fast recovery called alactic, as there is just needs to be recovered of ATP PC system and a replenish of myoglobin. The body has used oxygen throughout most of the exercise, and so doesn't have lots of alactic acid breakdown and the maintenance of ventilation, circulation, and temperature. These don't need to be massively recovered, just a bit, and that's why there is only a small recovery compared to fast. Alactic and lactic. Within excess post-exercise oxygen consumption, there are 2 exercises to the recovery as located on the graph. At place A and D, you can see that the section A lasts for 2 to 3 minutes. That shows it's a very quick recovery. And section D can last for a very long period of time. This shows it's a slow recovery. A stands for the alactic depth. This is the fast component. This is where the replenishment of ATP and PC. This is because ATP-PC takes 2 to 3 minutes to replenish, and so will do within the alactic. This is why it happens. Half of the ATP-PC system gets replenished in the first 30 seconds. Within the fast component, the replenishment of the muscle store of myoglobin. This is found in the muscle sarcoplasm. In recovery, the amount of oxygen is being breathed. The same amount of oxygen is being breathed, which decreases, but the myoglobin get replenished with the oxygen. The hemoglobin get recovered in the sense that it gets replenished with its last pair of oxygen. The process uses 3 to 4 litres of oxygen and takes about 5 minutes. In the graph section labelled D is a lactic acid depth. This is the slow component. This aids in removal of lactic acid during the recovery. Lactic acid gets removed or converted during recovery. It gets converted to pyruvic acid. This enters the Krebs cycle. 65% of it is converted into carbon dioxide, and the recovery lactic acids get removed or converted. Oh, I messed that up. Gets converted to the pyruvic acid. This enters the Krebs cycle. 65% is converted into CO2 and H2O. 20% of it gets converted into glycogen. 5% gets converted into glucose, and 10% gets converted into proteins. Also, within the slow component, the maintenance of ventilation, circulation, and body temperature happens. For ventilation and circulation, the breathing remains slightly elevated and above VO2 at rest. This is followed after exercise. This is so that the CO2 to the tissues and then the removal of CO2 from tissues, as there can be a sudden decrease, otherwise muscle tissues wouldn't function as they should. For circulation, if the skeletal pump or movement of blood that had been happening during the exercise stops, then there could be blood clotting, as it needs to gradually decrease for the body temperature. The heat production is a lot more higher than the heat removal during exercise, and so the temperature needs to have a gradual decrease. This uses 5 to 8 litres of oxygen and is normally between 1 to 24 hours. Within recovery, we need to keep the metabolic rates higher than normal. This is to keep the oxygen levels higher than normal, as more carbon dioxide will need to be removed. Ventilation, breathing rate, and heart rate will all need to be higher so that the flow of oxygen is the same level when exercising, slowly decreasing. This is so that alactic can resynthesize ATP-PC and replenish myoglobin and hemoglobin, and in the lactacid can remove lactic acid by creating it into carbon dioxide, oxygen, glycogen, and pyruvic acid. Next up is DOMS, active cool-down, warm-up, and nutrient. After exercising between 24 to 72 hours, you get DOMS. This is delayed onset muscle soreness. Once exercising has occurred, this happens because of the strenuous exercise and micro-ripping of the muscle fibers. There are some ways in which DOMS can be reduced when it happens by staying hydrated or increasing electrolytes, by getting a massage because it reduces inflammation. Another way is increased circulation. You can shorten the duration of the muscle tears ripping and healing with more blood being circulated. Different ways to aid recovery are active cool down. This is what helps to increase the amount of oxygen that's being delivered to the muscles to increase, so this helps speed up as part of EPOC. The slow and fast components, for example, if you have a active cool down, lactic acid is going to break down more easily than waiting for hours for it to break down. An active cool down will help it break down quicker. Another recovery strategy is to warm up before exercise, so when you start exercising you aren't starting at rest level. This will decrease the amount of oxygen deficit you need, as your oxygen usage has already been minimized. Another recovery strategy is the type of nutrients you take in as an effective diet strategy before, during, and after exercise. And after exercise activity can delay fatigue, so speeds up recovery.